Hello. By divine mandate, you are all required to join us in the hunt for literature of godly goodness. You shall continue to the hunt every 2 weeks until only one remains.
And with that, welcome to our literary Agon and this week's episode of the 800's. I'm your co-host, Alex, and you just heard from my fellow co-host, Adam, and behind the scenes, our tech man, Alan. Shout out, whoop whoop.
Yeah, so if you joined us on the pre-show, you probably heard some Alan, mute your crap.
Sorry about that, folks.
If you joined us on the pre-show, you heard some Incompetech music. That was Fearless First. To hear some more awesome tunes by Incompetech, check them out at incompetech.filmmusic.io. They got a lot of cool stuff, so check it out. Also, if you want to check up on some of our other cool videos, we have a YouTube channel. There's a link down below the video. Go ahead and check that out for other books and some other projects that we've done, like our podcast, Row with Advantage. And if you're like me and love audiobooks, how about a 1 month free subscription to Audible? Go to dmstable.com/audible and sign up today. And finally, we have a Patreon page where I think it's still $2 is the cheapest option. Gets you the ability to vote on what book we read next. The vote for the next book is still going now. So quick sign up for Patreon and vote on our next book. With that.
Sorry.
We're a little rough on this today, apparently.
My computer is just not cooperating. And anyways, this week on 800's, we will be discussing our first Women's Month book, Lore by Alexandra Bracken, Dewey Decimal Designation 813. Among the people of Bracken's world walk 9 gods of ancient Greece. Once every 7 years, the Agon begins, and the gods are hunted by the descendant families of ancient Greek heroes for the chance at glory, power, and immortality. Lore, the last of the Perseus bloodline, has rejected this life, but she's pulled back in by the pleas of a friend, the promise of revenge, and the hope of escape.
Ooh.
Chills.
So yeah, if this is your first time joining us tonight, or if you just need a quick refresher, how this works is Alex and I will pose topics, and we'll talk amongst ourselves about it real quick. And while we're doing that, feel free to give us a comment in the chat on the stream, and we'll read those and respond and try to interact with you guys as much as possible. As well as if you guys have something you want to personally talk about, go ahead, put that in the chat at any time, and we'll try and hit it up. This is really about conversation. Alex and I are happy to talk back and forth at each other, but we really love it when we have somebody else to get in the mix with our comments and such.
All right, and our usual reminder that this is not a kids show. This is aimed more towards our adults. We do cover adult topics, and with that, I'll also mention that there are a few trigger warnings in this particular book, both for violence and sexual assaults, among other things. So just be warned of that. We will be talking about these things with as much respect and care as we can. Also with that, we are trying to build a respectful and supportive community, which means basically be nice or fuck right off.
Gets me every time. All right, with that, let's jump into the topics. What was your first impression of the book?
Thought it was a nice, easy, fun read. I mean, it's definitely geared towards a certain audience. It was meant to be like a YA novel for mid to late teens, and you can feel that a little bit, but it's a genuinely enjoyable story and premise. And I personally am obsessed with mythology of all kinds, Greek being the progenitor of that obsession. So this was, I geeked out on this one. But it was enjoyable, and I had a lot of fun with it. I'm looking forward to discussing it more. What about you, Adam?
Oh yeah, first real quick, hi to Grizzo. Hope I said that right, but
Hello, Grizzo. First time.
and hi VS Drake as always. So yeah, my first impression of this book, gosh, we've been doing a bunch of different books lately, different kind of writing that I'm not used to. This is definitely one of those books that's right up my alley.
Yeah, return to the formula.
Yeah, it was refreshing, I have to say. I really liked where Bracken decided to start the story off, and learning about lore and like her now life
Mhm.
outside of the Agon. I thought that was pretty cool and well done. I really set up a feel about who Lore is, what her current situation is. I really set the scene of New York City really well. So yeah, I was
Yeah,
super excited.
yeah, and I completely agree with V.S. Drake that it's great that it was like a completely self-encapsulated book. I very much like the fact that it was a standalone novel. Presumably, like I really hope they don't try to franchise this out, but and also having that strong female presence made this a perfect book for our Women's Month opener.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
and that opening scene, I think, also set the tone for what Lore was fighting for throughout most of the book, which I thought it did a very good job of like setting up like a mythos for the world, setting up characters, and setting up a premise of motivation. And I thought that was very well done. Um,
I definitely agree with that.
so, what did you think though of the overall writing style for this book when you were reading it?
I gotta say, I definitely have opinions on this. um,
We'll let you get that question in, so we'll also pose that to the chat. What are some things you maybe liked or disliked about the writing style for this book?
so
But
I gotta say, I I really think this book should have been a third person story with jumping characters. Um, it was a first person lore only story. I liked the colorful attention to detail. It definitely flowed really smoothly. It didn't feel like Bracken was stopping to describe things. Everything really fit well within the story, but there were some things that felt forced because it was specifically from Laura's perspective. So Laura had to find out about things in a specific way. Like the one example that comes to mind was um, they go, I forget where it was. They go to one of the houses and Wrath had already attacked and they were too
um,
late.
I'm not sure because that happened twice, both with the Odysseus and the Acolytes.
And I feel like the story would have hit harder if we as the reader could have been there to witness that scene. But because it's from specifically Laura's perspective, we don't have that opportunity because Laura wasn't there. But
Uh,
other than that, though, I felt like it was really really good writing and really smooth writing.
V.S. Drake seems to both agree and disagree. Disagrees about the third person comment, but seems to agree that there was some railroading in the process. But I also tend to agree with V.S. Drake on the I don't think it needed to be a third person, but it could have been handled a bit better in first person. Because one of the things you can do in your first person is you can use the shock of discovery in the first person in the way you can't with a third person because you're expected to be able to flip to that scene. Otherwise, it feels like you're leaving parts out, which is the entire opposite problem, and that starts to feel plot holish. And so with the first person, you just have to use the advantages that you're given. And maybe Alexandra Bracken didn't use that to the fullest possible effect there, but it I think that the first person was the right choice because the whole point is we're supposed to see what it's like from the perspective of this very specific person, because she has the most, arguably the most unique perspective on the Agon as a whole, and there isn't the premise or the character reasons built into the other characters for them to have the same perspective that she does, because she both wants to be in it and hates it with every fiber of her being. And most of them kind of take that hatred part for granted until the very end of the book. Like they just don't see it. But she has the reasons and the motivation for both. And so I thought she was a good vehicle for the story and a solid character in and of her own. And I actually preferred it being in first person rather than third. Seems like Grizzo agrees. I'm not sure with which part.
The whole thing, everything you said, Rizzo, 100%.
Well, it could have been for V.S. Drake, because V.S. Drake also mentioned that they felt for the age Laura was, the book was a bit angsty. This is a book for teens. Teens are angsty. I thought that was pretty spot on.
Yeah. There's definitely an aspect to this book that you and I, as grown adults, won't appreciate, but can overlook because we're not the exact target audience.
Yeah, and I completely agree. I had to take it for what it was. This was not going to be the next literary think piece of the century, but it is a solid premise of what I thought was a well-written book. One of the things, though, that I thought was interesting about this is how cinematic everything felt. Like this felt like almost like a very fluid screenplay without like the dialogue pieces like being quite so obvious. The way things were described, I felt like I could see it, but I never felt like I was in it, Whereas like some other authors that we've talked about, we really feel like we're in it with the other person, but it requires a certain level of description that Bracken doesn't really get into. But I never felt like I couldn't imagine exactly where I was or where Lore was in the book. And to me that screams cinematic writing style. And actually, I believe Bracken has written for Disney before. I know this book is aligned with Disney's publisher for books as well. But I would put money down that this gets turned into a movie at some point, or at least a mini series.
Yeah.
But I enjoyed it. There are definitely some issues, like there's some railroading, and there are a few minor plot holes, which we'll get to as we start discussing the plot a bit more. But overall, I thought it was a fairly enjoyable book, and I actually really enjoyed the characters. And for the first time, I think, in this entire series of the 800s, the main character was my favorite character in the book. Like, that we've had a single main character, which is, seems like K-Brock agrees. It reads like a screenplay.
Yeah.
Welcome back, by the way. So
yeah, I definitely agree with the description factors. I think a lot of novels do have that kind of effect where it's a lot of dialogue heavy novels where you're just watching people talk, have that. You're not really there, but you can see there.
Mhm.
I definitely agree with what you're saying about that. I liked it. It's the discussions that we were prying into as the reader felt entertaining, felt interesting. I will say there was one that I was a little bit cringy on, which was that I don't know what you call it, spying on scene near the end where Lore is eavesdropping on Van and was it Miles?
Yeah,
Her
it was Miles
roommate?
Van. Yeah, it's a little. Yeah.
that one was like.
Thank you for dropping by, LPAC Phantom. Miss you too. Hope to have you around a bit more soon, even if you're just dropping by.
Good seeing you, LPAC. Hope to see you again in 2 weeks.
Definitely enjoying this active chat that we've got going.
Yeah, thanks for not lurking, guys. Let's move on to plot holes real quick before we dive right into specific plot points.
All right.
Do you have any plot holes you want to talk about?
I think there's a couple that I had a little trouble stringing together. How like exactly how Hermes figured out everything that Hermes did. I mean, they kind of bring up that Hermes just figured some stuff out and was protecting Lore, so that because she was the key to Wrath taking things over, but they kind of hand waved a bit of like how Hermes figured this out. And if you don't know Greek mythology, you can't fill in that gap quite as well, because Hermes is the messenger god. Hermes is the god of information. And so like if you don't have that context, it doesn't seem to quite fit without knowing that. I agree with Grizzle. Most of them, like a good book actually does that. I think raises a lot of questions, but satisfyingly answers them. The plot holes that I saw were ones that were like just kind of yeah, you can make that leap if you know this stuff, but if you don't, it basically is just like it happened. Like
yeah,
poof.
I will. To that point, I will say there were a couple things in the book that felt more like when you first read it, it's like, that doesn't quite make sense, but okay. And then later it's explaining, you're like, okay, I see how that makes sense. So that kind of bothered me a little bit with a couple of aspects of the book. But
Specifically,
again, like why Hermes would care to protect Lore at all?
I think that was mostly just the fear of Wrath. But again, like you said, it's something that's just kind of implied but never like made official.
Yeah,
Like it seemed like Hermes just didn't agree with Wrath's plan, didn't want or potentially didn't want to die because Wrath's plan meant killing all the other gods, new or old.
yeah.
Um,
Let me
whatever.
pitch a plot hole real quick here.
Right.
Or this could have been something I just missed. Yeah. Okay, here it comes. You ready?
Yeah.
Why don't the gods just kill all the hunters during the 7 years?
That's actually, I think, a good example of why uh I like a good example of like what I just said about like the hand waving stuff that's just kind of implied. I think the implication is that you can only gain the god's power if you kill them during the Agon.
Yeah, but why don't the gods kill the hunters?
Oh, why don't the gods kill the hunter?
Yeah.
That part, you know what? Yeah, plot hole. Holy crud.
Grizzo,
Zeus.
yeah, Grizzo says Zeus forbids it. Was
Let's
that mentioned in the book?
No, it does mention it, but like I consider it a plot hole because what's actually stopping them other than just tradition, especially the new gods. I can understand why maybe like Artemis and Athena, the old gods, don't do it, is because they know Zeus. They know that that's a big no-no. But
Yeah.
like considering the arrogance of some of the other like new gods, I'm really surprised that there isn't some of that goes on.
Via Drake, my opinion on why they wore the masks was more so for protection from other hunters and
Yes.
to hide their identity from the general populace if they get caught murdering people in the streets.
Yeah. I completely agree that was again, it's another one of those things that got a little bit like implicated but never really fully explained. And I I think part of it also is that yeah, these people kill each other, but they're not like, and they are warriors, but they're not inherently bloodthirsty, with the exception of Wrath and potentially the Kedmedes. You know, they want to be able to live prosperous lives, and the best way to do that is to let each other flourish. And then during the once every 7 years, taking their shot at something bigger.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
guess I would have liked to see a little bit more of the hunters' lives outside of the Agon. Not as saying that this was something wrong with the book, but just I'm interested. I would have liked to see something about what they do between the Agons.
yes, K-Brock, there was something mentioned in there that their powers of the gods were limited during the Agon, but what we're discussing is the reasons why it wasn't used on other uh, hunters outside of the Agon. And I think that's more of like a just they're trying to live their lives and they plot for the next Agon, they train for the next Agon, but they don't. They just constantly killed each other off. It would just mean it be mutually assured destruction, more or less.
Yeah, Via Strake, the concept, I really liked it too. It felt very Hunger Gamesy, with less traps. More lore, less traps. Literally and figuratively, more lore.
Sorry, that one got me really good. Yeah, I completely agree. It has that feel to it, which is actually probably one of the big reasons that I'm thinking that this is going to wind up getting a movie deal at some point. Is it just has that epicness to it. There is more to the lore portion, which I really appreciated. You know, both in character and in story, and it again, I think it's that cinematic writing that just lends itself to that epicness of it, especially when we're talking about like the battle scenes, and the when they're talking about the action scenes. I think that was one of the better written portions of this, when it came to comparison to like other books that we've read. Like I really felt in it, especially when he was talking about Lore's fight uh, with Wrath's son. I forget his name, or uh, who was Wrath's son showed up, and they had that little battle with each other right after he killed the Reveler. Um,
Hey, who was that?
yeah, I forget his name, but anyways, their little fight. Like I was so engrossed in the fight, I forgot the dude's name. But it was really fun to be in there because I felt like it was it felt like the perspective of somebody who really understands like how fighting works and how a body moves. It didn't feel forced or hand wavy in that particular portion of the book. It's and again I can see it happening and it felt awesome. Like I was sitting there like cut his throat, cut his throat, cut his throat.
Didn't know you were so bloodthirsty, Alex.
I didn't know either, but that was what Bracken and the Reveler incited it.
I will say, like, this is another plot hole here, or maybe not. I'll let you guys decide. Lore knew where to find everybody, even after 7 years. Like, I don't know. It would seem like the hunters would want to move around a little bit more than they seemingly did if she could just find them again 7 years later, no problem.
Um, yeah, that one felt a little like I was a little unsure. I know part of it is because like all of them, based on the god powers that they have, build like dominant businesses around it, and so keeping a territory does make sense. But like you said, even if you kept a territory, moving things around within said territory, I'm surprised as well that they didn't do more of that. Via Strike, it did felt like a bit of a cut corner. Oh, Bellin Cadmo, thank you, Grizzo, for getting that one. Whew. I mean, the dude was a little shit in the book, so like, forget his name, but
He's unimportant now because he's a shit.
like, and it had nothing to do with the fact that he was a literal bastard. He was just a dick, and I mean, but that's what he was more or less raised to be. I mean, when you've got a father like Wrath. Whew.
Yeah.
Speaking
So
of which, Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
Let's talk Wrath real quick. Do you think Wrath was too evil, like unbelievably evil, or do you think he
Um,
was reasonably evil?
I think he was reasonably evil, but again, part of it comes from the understanding of the god whose powers he had taken on. Ares is known not only as the god of war, but the god of bloodlust and madness. So, like, if you're going to take on the essence of that god, there's going to be a little of that involved. Like, and I
Okay.
think that's one of the things that Bracken actually did a decent job of is integrating human and god characteristics into these new god characters. Is that they did keep portions of themselves, but parts of it were either rounded and smoothed out or made more, well, angular and edgy, just specifically to fit that person with whatever god was inhabiting them. Where that happened with Wrath because you took a guy who was clearly power hungry, who clearly was used to taking what he wanted and being manipulative. Like, just look at how he manipulated his way into trying to get Laura as his bride when she was what 10 years old, and he was
Yeah. Ugh.
I
Yeah.
don't know what age he was at, but he was creepy. Creepy. His age was creep.
His age was too old to be okay with that.
I do
in
agree with
any sense.
Grizzo. I actually do agree with Grizzo. I wish there would have been more of Wrath himself, not just recollections of Wrath, but like actual Wrath himself in the book,
Yeah.
because I don't know. Some of it felt like I don't know how many of you have read Aragon, but felt like Galbatorix, where he was just kind of this looming evil that was in the memories of everybody, and he did some terrible things. Or if he showed up, it was like a quick swoop in, do something evil, and peace out.
Yeah.
Um, and it didn't allow him to maybe get as complex as he could have and maybe delve a bit more into that madness that was maybe eating away at him. But I did like him and found him believable as a character. But what I would like to pose is what did you think about, we've talked a bit about Wrath, but what did you think about some of the other gods, both old and new?
Ah, okay, cool. Um, one of the things I want to talk about with this topic is um the narrator for the audiobook's portrayal of Athena. And I specifically say that because the narrator does use a voice that is full of uh like I can't think of the word when you put yourself up on a pedestal and you think everybody else is
Arrogance.
beneath you. Yeah, the narrator gave a really good arrogant voice to Athena. I felt like that fit perfectly with how she was written. Um, and it gave me chills. So props to the narrator, who I'm gonna look up now so I can say props to a real person.
I would I would tend to agree with that, and it what it kind of fits is the idea of what what the Greek gods were like. In particular, if in Greek mythology, one of the recurring themes is something called hubris, and hubris is this idea of of mankind getting full of themselves. Um, and the gods often intervene to strike down this hubris and basically punish them, but punish them or humble them for said hubris. And one of the reasons they did this is because the gods lived with a certain level of haughtiness and arrogance and holier than thou.
Yeah.
Like like
Thanks,
like
real quick.
you
Thanks,
should,
Grizzo. Frido Wolf, you did an excellent job. Way to throw the attitude in there for Athena and all the other characters. Go ahead and continue, Alex.
and yes, but yeah, Friday Wolf, awesome job. I totally agree. And again, and like you said, thanks Grizzo for finding that one. Uh, I when it comes to this arrogance thing, like part of the reason why the gods struck it down is because you were getting too close to acting like you were on their level. And so and in order to strike people down for that, you have to kind of have that arrogant, like, well, this idea that I'm a god, I am better than you, just
Yeah.
inherently. And like you said, she did a really good job of portraying that vocally.
The pretentiousness came through like thick cream.
So, any thoughts on any of the others?
Yeah, I really liked gosh, the portrayal between the old god's feeling of like I've lived through this so many times. I'm exhausted of Aegon after Aegon. Like this is getting so old. Versus the new gods who are more gung ho and more like, yeah, I'm a god now. I'm gonna go f shit up. You know, uh, I like it. You could definitely tell like Athena and Hermes took a much more back screen approach to the hunt. Apollo was practically not even in the picture. Um, yeah, I I I
Well, I mean,
think
Castor
there
was
was good
Apollo.
portrayal. I mean, the previous Apollo
Okay, yeah.
before Castor was Apollo. When Apollo essentially, I don't know. It's almost. Do you? Let me pose this as a question. Do you think Apollo knew when he gave Castor his power that he would be ascending, or did he just do it to say, "Fuck it, I'm sick of this shit, I'm out"?
I think it was one of those things like I'm gonna pull the Disney reference where it couldn't be something that was done with the knowledge that they were doing it. You know, like Hercules in the Disney movie Hercules, he had to sacrifice his life to become a true hero. And it was the same kind of idea here where they had to do something willfully and knowing that they were making a sacrifice, that they were doing something that they had made a complete realization of, you know, what it means to actually value life. And uh, to do that, I don't think you could know that you were going to ascend doing it because it's not authentic in that case.
You got to
It's
do it for the right reasons.
yeah, and if you're doing it for the right reasons means that you would give up a plan. Like you'd be doing it with the idea that it's like Apollo says at the end. If a dying boy can have this courage, then so can I. You know, uh, so I don't think that Apollo did that with any sort of knowledge. Um, and V.S. Drake mentions that he really liked um, her, and I did too. V.S. Drake also mentions him being the case of an anti-new god, and I did like that there is the possibility of that, and that's where my theory of like how the gods and people combined, where they influence each other. And Apollo is known as a healer anyway, so it kind of fits with that characteristic, right?
Yeah.
Um, I personally was a bit uh I was not just because of the voice, but I was super intrigued by Athena. Not just because going back a long ways, she's probably been my favorite god in the Greek pantheon. Uh Goddess of wisdom and protection. Like I like what she stands for, but she is also known as the Grey Eye Lady because she's a goddess of justice and like so I did like that they Bracken did a really good job of integrating all those into like a person rather than an idea, which I enjoyed seeing all those elements unfold at some point in this book. In very different ways, in ways I probably wouldn't have predicted. Like
Yeah.
I more or less predicted the betrayal, but that was more based on general story outline than it was on the goddess herself. And even then, the surprise turn at the end about why she was doing it, I really enjoyed personally.
I will say like Athena struck me as a little too gung ho for the goddess of wisdom, but I think that moment where she flips at the end really shows like she she's true to her mythological character, right? she understands the situation and decides in the moment, like, okay, I'm on the wrong side. I need to do the right thing here and and flip over.
I like what V.S. Drake mentioned about the old gods versus the new, is that they did more hiding than fighting, and I agree, because I think that the old gods, they didn't have whole families to rely on. They were on their own, and every 7 years they were hunted without mercy. you
Yeah.
know, so like I really don't blame them for doing what for reacting that way. Like they had to play the long game, and you have to also remember that they were immortal before all this happened. So they have to know what it takes to survive
Yeah.
on a cosmological level, like let alone or a cosmic level, rather than just an earthly one. Um, but yeah, VS Drake's also right. The new gods definitely live like rock stars, and part of that is because they had the family support to take care of stuff. They basically just got to lean into their powers and let other people take care of the protecting them to some extent anyway, to running other aspects of their lives, and all they had to do was provide some level of prosperity for their family. You know, so
All they had to
definitely
do was
live like.
show off.
um, and see, I also agree with K. Brock. Apollo picked the perfect replacement. Uh, Someone with compassion for the sick makes a good healer. Couldn't agree more there. Um, Speaking of, I'm wondering if anybody else out there caught this. Did anybody else in our chat or you, Adam, catch the link between the families and the gods and the new gods in those families? You have to have a
But
pretty deep knowledge of Greek mythology to know this, though.
I didn't quite follow your question there, but I don't have a good Greek mythology understanding, so I'm guessing I wouldn't understand anyway.
Okay, so basically, every family has close vs Drake. They weren't patrons. Every family is based off a Greek hero. The Odysseus, Odysseus, Achilles, the Eclades, even the Cadmedes were descended from Cadmus. Every single one of those families, the new god that was in that family during this book was one in which the ancestor from which they descended had a clash with that god. Achilles
Hmm.
and Apollo clashed because Apollo was the patron god of Troy when Achilles helped take it down.
Hmm.
Cadmus killed the son of Ares, god of war in Greek mythology. Aphrodite and Odysseus clashed during the Odyssey itself because Aphrodite was a patron goddess of the people of one of the islands that Odysseus ended up on and slaughtered them. Um, so it was a pretty cool link. It's a pretty deep cut for mythology there. That if you don't know these things, that they are there. I thought that was super cool to see. Yeah, so that link makes sense though. Is that those gods who had a clash with these human heroes, those gods were the ones that were hunted by those families and ended up being overtaken. So I thought that was a pretty cool little link there.
Yeah, that
So
was
I told you I
good catch,
nerded out
Alex.
so hard over this book.
So where does
Sorry, B.S. Drake had a good one. She knew her lore.
All right, guys, thank you for joining us for the 800s. That's going to be a night. Sorry, it's not going to get better than that. So,
Oh man.
that is
Uh,
Laura's family name. What was it? Perseus?
Perseus. Yeah.
Perseus. Does that so then she had the link to
Zeus.
Medusa through his um the who went to how does she link up with Medusa, the shield
Okay.
and
So
stuff?
Perseus is also known as Perseus. is a Greek hero who was supposedly the son of Zeus and one of the many random Greek women that he boned down with, and he is given a chance to win the hand of a woman by defeating the Gorgon sisters and bringing back that one of their heads, specifically Medusa, who was the leader of these three Gorgon sisters. He is given, and also this tie-in with Perseus and Athena. Perseus is given a sword and shield by Athena, and he's given wing. He's given winged sandals by Hermes. Also, the link to Gil. And he goes and kills Medusa in her sleep by using the reflection on the shield to cut off her head. And he uses the head of Medusa to kill Cetus the sea snake to save princess of Ethiopia, Andromeda, who was being sacrificed by her mother Cassiopeia and her father Cepheus. So that's their link, and that's also the link to Zeus. They are the ones descended from Zeus. And Perseus eventually became his line, the line of the Perseus line actually leads down to Heracles as well. So, like, two of the greatest Greek heroes ever known are in the same line, and they have a link to Zeus, just like in this book. And they have a link to Hermes and Athena, which, again, deep lore cuts.
I feel like I didn't bring enough to the table for this book, Alex.
Dude, no, this is all on me. Like, I have like 30 years of like just nerding out on this shit that like all came together.
well, hats off to you, sir, because that is impressive.
Well, what's impressive to me is how much of this was integrated into this book, because Bracken either has to be as much of a nerd as me. Nerd clipsing. But like, I really actually want, that's one of the things I deeply appreciated about this book is Bracken had to have been either equally nerdy about this subject, or she did a lot of good research and did some really cool tie-ins. And the best part is she made it her own along the way as well.
I definitely didn't see that while reading, because I don't have the Greek knowledge into mythology like you do, but consider me convinced and impressed. That was these things you are mentioning are very cool. So yeah, so Bracken, excellent job.
And for those of you who feel like nerding out even more, the Perseus, Cassiopeia, Andromeda, and Cephas all are in the roughly northern sky, all right next to each other, just like in the story from which they come. So feel free to go look up at the stars and read some more Greek mythology while you're at it. But let's move on to another topic before I nerd out too much more.
What do you got, Alex? What do you want to talk about?
They kind of glossed over it because they treated it like it wasn't important at the end. But what do you feel was like the true meaning of the second poem?
So let's recap the first poem. Do you remember what it was?
I don't remember the exact word for word, but basically the first poem just outlined what the Agon was, why the 9 gods were cast out of Olympus for trying to kill Zeus. Which also, there is mythological precedent for that, but I'll shut up about it.
Well, I'll say this about my opinion about the second poem. Then it feels, to me, it felt like, like Zeus knew it had to end sometime, some way, but didn't want it to end at the first Agon. Mm-hmm. So he hid the true exit strategy. He believed that his gods and maybe even the new gods could deserve godhood and come back to that understanding of what it means to be a god, and didn't want to straight up say, because like you said, you foreknowledge kind of ruins it. I think he wanted it to be more of a discovery thing. They had to experience what it meant to be mortal in order to truly appreciate immortality. So to say it off the bat, like, you've got to not be a dick, and then you can come back. I don't think that would have worked as well as hiding it somewhere and letting them find it years later after experiencing a mortal life.
Uh, yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. It puts Zeus in a much more compassionate light than I know him to be from mythology.
There you
But
go.
like, but like, I'm going to get into this a little bit. I'll try and cut back on it a bit from what I did before. But Zeus, there is a lot of this idea of doing trials to earn your place in Greek mythology. And like you said, it's typically a lesson that's hidden within a lesson. And I think that's exactly what Zeus was doing, and why it was forgotten is like they made the important parts, the things that people are who with hubris are meant to go after, the things that give power, the things that give glory, kleos, you know, and to earn your way in, you have to realize that it's something deeply more than that. Just like there's more to the poem. And I think that was like the overall meaning. It looks like VS Drake has a question. We'll let him get that in, but
Can continue while he's typing.
but I do agree with his. You got to earn what you've got, and so is the Agon done or just done for three gods? Actually, I think VS Drake that it is done just for those three gods. Uh, any of the ones that either died out entirely or didn't make that realization are still around, like presumably Tidebringer. Um, I don't think anybody got the power from the Reveler.
Well, the gods that were killed by gods, those powers are just gone, right?
And there were only 9 of them, so we know that, Wrath, obviously, nah. Um, so that would be Ares. We've got Apollo, who did ascend. Um, we have Athena, who did. So those are the 3 that it's done for. Like, and then the other ones, presumably, there's the Reveler, done, because the Reveler was killed by Athena, who couldn't gain the other power. Yeah, there were 5. Yeah, there were 5 in the other world, I think.
I'd say that's the question, is like, whose godly powers remained in the mortal world?
I think Tidebringer was the only one, unless there was somebody else causing New York City to flood,
I
because
thought
Tidebringer would be the only one that was left, unless they can. Did I miss then? VS Drake, correct me then. Did I miss who was
Tidebringer
actually?
died.
Well, that's what I thought too. Yeah.
By whose hand?
Oh, by Athena's hand. That's right. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I forgot that part. I
Yeah.
was so focused on other stuff going on. Yeah. So yeah, I think then the Agon is done unless there's a means by which Zeus brings them back, or maybe even Hades brings back the ones that didn't make it, and there's like another round of this, or if there's like an underworld version, I don't know. But
I
the
would say
Agon,
I think Zeus recalling Lore and Castor's power was him saying the Agon is done.
the
Go
ones who
back
are
to your
gonna,
mortal lives.
I really hope so, because that really sets this as a standalone book, and I really enjoyed that aspect of this, because it would be really easy to turn this book into a franchise if you just kind of twist a few things. All it has to be is, like I said, you could have Hades resurrect them all and try it again in a different era or whatever. And I don't know, that anything beyond what it is feels like it would be super forced. So good on Bracken for making that the case, because I feel like this is something Disney's going to want to exploit.
Gotta make that money.
Tidebringer had a child. Tide Pod.
Tide Pod's
Man,
dead. It got eaten by some teenager.
oh man. Okay, so apparently we're also a comedy podcast. Welcome to the 800's. Yes, Drake is killing it tonight.
Yeah.
And so is everybody. Thank you, Grizzo, again, and K-Brock for your contributions thus far. Does Disney do sequels? Do they not do sequels? Do they ever not do sequels?
It depends if they made money on the first one, K Brock. If they did, then yes, they do sequels.
It didn't make $1? Yes, sequel.
I could see Disney doing a prequel for lore.
Yeah, that is very true. That is a good point. And if they want to do that on the television version, that's like a television version, or maybe even have Bracken do a screenplay for another movie, that's fine. But I think as a book, I would, maybe this is just me as a fan of it, I hope it stays as a standalone because I like it as it is. It wrapped up super well. Speaking of which, I would love to hear other people's thoughts on Athena's revelation at the end. Lore and Athena's revelation at the end. So, what were your thoughts about how Athena, like what her motivations were, and how she came together with Lore?
I think. I mean, it kind of ties into what we talked about earlier with the old gods going through this time and time again and kind of getting a little sick of it, and their hearts aren't in the Agon. They just want it to be over, right? I think Athena went into the previous Agon as well as this one with a bit of malice. I think she was just like, screw this, I'm so done. And then I think the ending was more of her realizing like exactly what she needed to realize to ascend. It's not about me. It's not about it's not about doing whatever I want because I'm a god. It's about figuring out who deserves uh, divine intervention and who deserves to be in the spotlight. And it's not necessarily the gods. It's those brick and mortar people of the world who are just there to do the best they can. And uh, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
I completely agree. That's a great way of putting it. And I also agree with VS Drake mentioning that it's a redemption arc. And who better to have a redemption arc than Lore herself, who I think we need to talk more about. Like I kind of left Best for last because, again, personally my favorite character. I loved her arc for this. It was perfect for our Women's Month. And her redemption was, I think, overcoming so much of her trauma, and to see the real flaws in a character and to have that character recognize those flaws, and not in some petty like, oh, they're there but fuck those flaws, whatever. No, she took ownership of the flaws and she knew them, she acknowledged them in a way that I don't think we've had too many characters do that over the course of our reading. And she got to be strong in a lot of different ways, and she learned what real strength meant, both through her friendship with Miles, who also great character, by the way,
Yeah.
Like true friend through and through. The stay with me part, yeah.
Yeah, that hit heavy. The stay with me.
Yeah. The other one that I know, and I feel like I would be remiss if we didn't talk about this at least a little bit, that hit hard was, again, the trauma that she went through as a child,
Oh
being
yeah.
this prize that, well, prize or whatever, that was like a bargaining chip for a god that wanted her when she was 10, when she was staying with the Odysseus, how the archon of that group abused her, and how, like, everything, the way she reacted is one of a million different ways somebody in that situation could act, but every instant of it felt believable, almost scarily so,
Yeah.
being in it with her. But she dealt with it in her own way, in a flawed way in some regards, with the way that she blocked things out and she wouldn't deal with them until she was forced to face them. That's a very common thing when it comes to trauma, is escape. And oh, the babies, oh, her sisters.
Yeah.
Oh man, that was brutal.
I think to cut in here,
Sorry.
Bracken handled that super well. How like Lore didn't mention it and like kept it to herself and like practically blocked it out until the very end. Um, like it ties in so well with what I think an actual person would do in that situation where you just can't think about it. You can't live it because it's
It's too
unbearable.
big.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, even for somebody who is as strong and fierce and uh, you know, presumably resourceful as Lore is, that I think that was important to show that no matter how strong that person is, that sort of trauma can be that overwhelming for somebody, that the only thing you can do is try to escape it, until, she eventually had to face it, and that's what everybody has to do in order to get over it. But like, she needed the right pieces in place, and I felt like Bracken did a great job of setting those pieces in place for her to have a believable arc towards facing that trauma. It was, you know, yeah, K. Brock mentions that she was trained to take physical and mental pain, and even being trained to face that, it was still something that was unbearable for the longest time, for years.
Yeah.
And shutting things out is the way that a lot of people do it, and it works short term, but eventually it comes around and it needs to be faced. And I really appreciated that it was well earned, it was done in a way that was believable, and it was done in a way that was messy, but messy, but it was ultimately healthy for her.
I will say like this goes back to one of the things that I thought was a plot hole that didn't end up being a plot hole. It just didn't make sense at the time. Was like everybody and their brother knew that Lore had the shield. Like, it made sense that she had it, and when she was like, "No, I don't have it," she was totally unbelievable. um, the fact that that shield is like a metaphor for her losing her entire family makes total sense why she would be like, I don't have it. It's not mine. Nope. Like she's trying to disassociate herself from that whole ordeal. And like at first I was like, it makes no sense for her to deny that she has the shield. And then when what is explained about her family and what happened to them, I was like, okay, I get it. Like that's definitely why she didn't want to talk about the shield and didn't want to admit that she had it.
Yeah, because it was something bigger than, for her, something bigger than anything else in the world. bigger than even her own life. It took the most incredible circumstances to get her to face it, and it was because she had been taught and she had the strength to distract herself. But ultimately, that was damaging. And like K Brock said, it is messy when you have to face grief and loss and trauma. And uh, when you get to those points where you're forced to face it, sometimes it does take a rock bottom, but I think that should be a realization for people who have gone through that sort of thing, that maybe it doesn't have to get to rock bottom to get to that place. It's hard, absolutely, and you do have to push to get it to happen, but if you hide it from it that hard, the way it's going to knock you back into facing it is going to be just as hard, you know.
Yeah.
Um, I do agree though with VS Drake that it was confusing throughout, because I'm like, but even I thought, I was like, wait, she didn't take it? I know she said she didn't, but like, who else? Especially when we found out that for the longest time I thought maybe it was Hermes, and then when we found out Hermes was Gil, I was like, wait, nope, there goes my theory. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah. But what a good hiding spot for the shield though. A freaking sewer below the place you stole it.
It's the exact same place it was, but on the other side of the wall.
Random comment about that. I was really surprised we didn't see more gods who just went and effed off into a sewer somewhere until the 7 days were over.
Well, I mean, presumably that's something that might have happened in the past. Like, I'm really not sure what that would have been like. You'd Again, this maybe, if there is a prequel, they can explore that a bit more. Like, what was the first Agam like?
Yeah.
Um,
Probably pride would keep them out for at least the ancient ones.
I mean, it depends.
Yep. Exactly what VS Drake just said. They're too proud.
Yeah, I mean, I also don't know enough about like how they interpreted Zeus's original proclamation, because it might be that they weren't allowed to completely, you know, disappear from it. Although the thing is that these families presumably span the whole world by the time of this story. So, you know, the only way to escape it would be to leave the whole planet. So, or ascend, you know. But getting back a little bit to lore, um, another thing that I really liked about this is how Bracken explored her relationships with people, and I think that's part of the reason why I liked that it was first person, is we got to kind of see what that relationship was like just through this one person. And there's certain things that when you're only exploring one person, you can explore unique dynamics, because there is guesswork, just like for that person there is for us. In particular, though, I really liked her back and forth with Miles. Like, it was so cool to see just a character that was just like a true friend through and through, who was resourceful, who was willing to just be there. It wasn't like just a lame duck character either, who was there just to be kind of like a, you know, comic relief in the background or anything. It was a character who truly cared about lore. Lore cared about him, and he was went out of his way to be there for her. And I thought that was really cool to see that dynamic. The love scene stuff, I think that for me is where the teen uh stuff stood out the most. Like,
Yeah.
uh between her and Castor. Like, that stuff, I was not gonna lie, not quite as creepy, but I was getting some mild Twilight flashbacks there.
I will say I think that Bracken did a good job framing their friendship first. Like I liked the tie into their past, um, survivals of the training, and that they propped each other up so that neither of them failed, kind of a deal. I did like that between their two relationships. I don't know if the romantic part needed to be in there, but again, teen novel, so
Yeah, I think V.S. Drake just mentioned it, the exact
yes.
reason why I probably had those flashbacks is this sparked me. You know, like I think the first flashback was just her description of like his chin was like chiseled out of marble, and I was just like, I was like, teen romance. I'll let them have it.
All right, I think we've got time for one more topic from us and maybe a topic from the chat. If anybody
Yeah,
in
chat.
chat has anything you want to talk about.
Yeah, please, chat. Give us something. Why don't you give us? I picked the last one. Why don't you give us our final topic from us, Adam?
Okay, let me reference the sheet here. I just kind of assumed you were running the show now, so um, I would like to talk about.
Well, I think we got a topic from K Brock, so why don't we go with that one while you're thinking of your final one? Was Miles the only relationship Lore didn't think she lost and regained? Maybe you can clarify that a little bit for us, K Brock, what you mean by that. Um, I what I'm getting out of that though is it sounds like Miles is the only relationship that was stable in her life, like throughout the entire time of that relationship. Um,
Yeah,
and sorry, sorry. I think what's being said there though is I do think that that is what made that relationship special between Miles and Lore. Um, is that it was the most stable. She never did lose them figuratively or literally. You know, because Castor supposedly died, came back. Um, Gil died, her parents died, her sister died. Iroh betrayed her at some point. Miles was the only consistent friend throughout that entire thing, and it was. I think maybe that's part of the reason why I gravitated toward him as a character is like he was a stable factor in somebody's life.
yeah. We got a lot of good comments in the chat here about who's a friend and who's not. um, I I think Miles was yeah, definitely there to give Laura a sense of escape, considering everybody else that she knew was part of the Agon, and either that she knew was part of the Agon or didn't in the case of Hermes. Um, yeah, I think what I really liked about Miles was he was a no questions asked, I will help you bury the body kind of friend.
He absolutely was, and I actually like what V.S. Drake said is that he was her true her touchstone to true humanity. That thing that she wanted, that she was fighting for from the beginning, and that's a great way of putting that, V.S. Drake. You know what that reminder of what life is like outside of the Agon, and again what she was hoping for from the very beginning. And he gave her, and one of the best parts about it is because he was that ride or die friend. He also showed her that even if she entered again, there is a way back out. You know, like
Yeah,
that it didn't have to be once you're in forever. You know, he was a touchstone, an anchor point. Um, yeah, and that's a really good point, K Rock. Thanks for bringing that up. Is that idea that like, well, the fact that she lost basically everybody, regained some of them, but Miles was just there the entire time, and that loss and regaining in and of itself, like how do you even grieve that? You know,
yeah,
yeah, you almost had that turnaround, that emotional whiplash. Yeah, I almost have to grieve your own grief for a second.
So kind of a spin off of this, uh, but kind of a little different.
Is
Do you
this our
think?
final topic then, or?
Yeah, final topic. Do you think Lore really wanted to leave the Agon at the beginning? Like,
That's a good point.
she kept up her training, she kept fighting, and as soon as Athena showed up, she was back in.
I think what kept her in it, I don't think she ever, I think she wanted to leave the Agon, but she wasn't ready to at that point. Like, I think there was always a part of her that wanted to, but she was absolutely not ready for it because she had not dealt with her trauma. She was still wanted revenge against Wrath. Like, and the only real way to do that was to get him when he was most vulnerable. And that's during the Agon. And I think she knew that on some level as well. And it's, I think she had to process it to deal with it. And she couldn't deal with it away from it because she had run away from it. So, yeah, I do think she wanted that, but I absolutely think she wasn't ready. And there's no way to be ready unless she faced what she had been running from for all those years. Now, did it have to happen in the messy, explodey way in which it did? No, not necessarily. But I mean, she could have done it through many, many years of a very understanding therapist who wouldn't put her in a hospital. But
Yeah, I think I kind of agree with your mindset there. Um, I think she wanted to leave, but couldn't leave with how she left things with her family's passing.
Mhm.
I think she needed to face that before she left the Agon. I think that was very much tied in with the Agon, her getting over it and moving on. Like, especially considering when Athena showed up and was like, "I'll help you kill the person responsible for your family's death," and she was right into it. Right, she was like, "Okay, let's do this." Uh, I think that was her saying, I need to cope with this before I can get rid of this life." So
Well, I'm not even sure it was necessarily coping because I think that this book also did a good job of showing that revenge is not the answer in a kind of unique way. In that, yeah, ultimately Wrath gets his comeuppance, but it wasn't the revenge itself that gave her the healing and release that she needed to move on. It wasn't that that did it. It was her facing her own memories of her taking responsibility um, for her actions or inactions, and for her just kind of coming to terms with it. And she needed to go through a journey to do that. You know, your pretty prototypical hero's journey.
yeah,
But revenge wasn't the answer. And I actually kind of like what V.S. Drake said. It's a unique way of looking at it. That V.S. Drake says they think that the start of the Agon was not uh, ready for her to leave. You know, so by the middle, she was back in it, thriving, and then she was ready. And I think that's exactly right.
yeah.
Uh,
I think I agree with what you're saying too about like how she can heal from the trauma. I don't think she knew at the beginning that that's what she needed to do. I think she definitely thought that killing her family's killer would be the thing that set her free. But
oh yeah, absolutely. She thought that that was her reason for getting back in and why it was so quick, is because revenge seems like this quick out for a lot of emotions that need to be processed. Because on some level, you want to see people like revenge. It stems from this idea that you want to see people understand the pain that you've gone through. And oftentimes, the only way we can think to make people understand that pain is to inflict a similar or worse pain.
yeah,
And, you know, revenge feels like that's going to be it, but that's the thing is it typically ends in an unsatisfying way for the person seeking it, unless they're a sociopath, in which case, um, might be a little different. but I think it did a good job of showing that there is a point where that stops, where the revenge does not do enough, and it has to be something bigger. Yeah,
Yeah, I agree with the metaphor Vias Drake added in there about Athena and the shield. Definitely follows that same line of what you need is not necessarily, or what you want is not necessarily what you need.
exactly. And that's I think what made it so satisfying to end that way, is that, between the fact that it wrapped up in a nice way that makes it a self-contained novel, and the fact that it gave that message in both a human and divine way.
Yeah. All right, let's talk final thoughts. What were your final impressions and opinions of Lore by Alexandra Bracken?
Being the mythology nerd that I am, great freaking book. I would recommend it. There are some, like, don't expect it to be like the next Jane Austen or Great Expectations or whatever, but it's a great premise. It builds on an already strong mythos and creates something unique within it. I would definitely recommend it to anybody who likes high fantasy with an element of like urban fantasy to it and modernism, and who doesn't mind it being a little simple. Like, it's a fun read. Like, if you want a simple fun read that's just enjoyable, like, I would highly recommend this book. I look forward hopefully to reading more from Alexandra Bracken. From what I've read, she has been improving with each book, so maybe the next one will be, you know,
Even better.
even better. But it's hard to beat this one for me, being the kind of nerd that I am. But, like I said, I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a good story. I think it's what we needed on this show, or at least what I needed on this show, because a lot of other ones I spent a lot of time kind of in my head, and this one I just kind of got to nerd out. So
I'll say for me, it's definitely a would recommend as well. I enjoyed the book. I thought it read smoothly, which attests to the author's skill. There were definitely a couple of points I felt were a little cringy and a little like unnatural, like the eavesdropping scene.
yeah,
It didn't seem like a natural thing. But I don't think those small aspects took away from the whole of the book. It was really well done, apparently really well researched. um, and I really enjoyed stepping into the Greek mythology world of New York City. So,
that was a lot of fun, and I agree with the little problems were really well handled. Final thoughts from the chat. On Yeah, it does help to understand that the target audience is teens, and if you keep that in mind, it definitely lets you kind of just see it for what it is. VS Drake gives it a solid 9 out of 10. It's probably around where I would place it for what it is. Like, it's a good book, has some cringy moments, but when you know for what it is, especially for a YA novel, I would give it a 9 out of 10 for sure,
yeah,
especially a fantasy one. Um, yeah, absolutely does hit the target market perfectly. VS Drake's already recommending it. I'm not sure if we still have Grizzo in the chat, or if they have any thoughts on it, but hopefully they enjoyed it as well, or at
that's
least agree with what's been said. But yeah, I think that's it for our final impressions. So why don't we do our final wrap ups here?
yeah. Well, let's talk about what's next.
All right.
So our book vote is over.
Oh,
So we have our
Grizzo
next
liked it.
Grizzo. Like good. Thank you, Grizzo, for getting in that last second comment there. So our next book. Oh, it didn't paste. Our next book is Truly Devious by Maureen Johnson. That's not the one of the vote that ended tonight. That's just the one that we voted on last time. But the vote results for tonight came up to Promise of Blood by Brian MacLeod, read by April 10. So those are our next two books. You should see them on your screen now. Truly Devious, looking forward to that. I believe one of our old friends from our podcasting days suggested that. Roll for Initiative, and then Promise of Blood was recommended to us by one of our good nerds on Discord. Speaking of Discord, you guys should join us there. We have a Discord channel that is everything nerdy, books, D&D, other nerd topics. We chit chat on there frequently, so if you want to join us there, then you should hit us up on our socials. Socials, you say? We have a Facebook page, DM's Table. The DM's Table for Facebook, and we also have a Twitter, DM's Table. So hit us up on those. We do cool book posts and as well as other things. So check us out. Patreon, if you want a say on what we read and to throw us a couple of dollars so we can keep operating, hit us up on Patreon. Our smallest one is just $2, so it's a pretty good deal. $2 a month gives you the opportunity to tell us what to do, which is something that I personally think is pretty cool. So hit us up. And finally, we have a YouTube channel. Check out our YouTube channel for other videos on books as well as podcasts and other cool things. And if you watch one of our YouTube channel videos about a book, feel free to leave comments about how you felt about the book, and we'll try and keep the conversation alive. And Alex, do you have anything about theme months you want to talk about?
All right, Truly Devious will be our second book for Women's Month, and that will wrap up March. We are headed into anything 800's April, back to the original formula. We'll be starting out with The Promise of Blood. We are still looking through tomorrow for recommendations for our next vote. And starting in April, we will be voting on May's books, as we vote on these about a month ahead. And anybody can vote for those books. So if you want to, wield the power of telling us what to do and what to read, you should be able to go to our Patreon. All people can vote for those books in April for May, and May will be a Bring a Friend to the 800's month, where we will hopefully have people, coming in pairs, or drag somebody along, get them involved. And so if they like to wield the power of the vote, then use that as some bait, because we're looking forward to having more people have more input. And if you like the power that you wield during that particular month, then please consider signing up on our Patreon. As Adam said, it's only $2 a month to wield that power of the vote all year long. Which is 26 books that you get to help choose if you want to sign up for that. And hopefully May will give you a chance, our books for May will give you a chance to get a feel for what that's like. And I think that's it for today.
Like Alex said, though, about the book choosing, that's one of the things we love about the 800's is we've gotten the opportunity to read books that we've never thought we would ever read. So it's a really cool aspect. And if you guys have something that you think is a really good book, definitely let us know about it so that we have the opportunity to read it and discuss it.
Or at least put it up for a vote.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we appreciate all of your suggestions and all of your input tonight. Chat was awesome. Thank you, VS Drake, K Brock, and Grizzo, and Alpac Phantom for the little shout out dropping in. And then, but I think that's it for tonight. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah. Thanks to all of our viewers and commentators. So it was a good convo tonight.
Yeah, it was a great, fun book, and we'll see you next book.
See you next book, guys.